Hello, everyone. Welcome to Maddox Digital and Customer Success Summit. You are currently watching Digital for All, getting buy-in on a digital strategy for all segments. I'm excited to introduce our speaker. As I introduce them, I'm going to ask them our icebreaker question, which is, what is your biggest digital addiction? And with us to present here, we have Dan Ennis, Director of Commercial Customer Success at Workato. So Dan, I will kick it over to you.
Hi, Pascal. Thanks for making the introduction there, and happy to answer the icebreaker. I was thinking about my biggest digital addiction, and I think it's maybe a little bit of a different one for some people. It's actually my subscription to my local theater chains app through them because they are spot on recommending like the right movies and when showtimes come up, and they've done a good job at picking up on some of the tastes there. So a little bit of a blend there of digital and in person in combination there, but I think that that's been one of my favorite investments to be able to spend and make sure I'm getting to see all the movies I want to see.
Right on. How cultured. Uh, well,
Not if you saw the actual movies I was seeing, you'd have a very different opinion than about culture there.
right on. Okay, well, I'll kick it over to you for the session. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Pascal. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining. I am really excited to be talking all of us through this topic, which is digital for all. How do you go about getting buy-in on a digital strategy for all segments? Really, the hypothesis I want us to answer is we all agree with the idea that digital is a strategy, not a segment, and yet the reality tends to look so much different. So how we'll get there, we're going to talk about what does it mean for digital CS to be a strategy and not just a segment. And then after that, we're going to walk into a little bit here on how do you actually differentiate your digital strategy in the different ways that you can. And then lastly, we'll talk through how do you go about getting buy-in and then leave time for plenty of Q&A. Brief intro on myself, though, just so you can know a little bit about me. I'm currently a Director of Commercial Customer Success at Workato, which means I'm not just over scale or digital. So that's why this particular topic is very close to my heart and close to my passion professionally. I'm a Bay Area native, born and raised, love the Bay Area. Can't imagine living anywhere else. West Coast, best coast. Apologies in advance. 10 years experience in customer success, plus several years leading teams, building scaled CS. And really my exposure has primarily been in PLG orgs that work with horizontal solutions. So a broad swath of different industries and verticals to work with. And I'm really passionate about the way we can elevate the way we're bringing digital tools to bring different experiences there. So wanted to start by talking about setting the stage. What do we mean when we talk about digital customer success as a strategy? And to understand that, we want to say that digital CS is not a segment. It is not just something that goes to the long tail of SMB customers. And so to have it be a strategy, what do we actually mean by that? And so one of my favorite definitions that I've heard very often and regularly about what digital customer success actually is getting the right content to the right person at the right time in the right channel, leading to the right results. Right content, right person, right time, in the right channel, leading to the right results. And if we focus on digital customer success with that as its driving force, as that what we're working towards, not just tech touch or not just the long tail of customers, we're able to achieve an impact that leads to benefits that aren't just for the SMB customers and the long tail. It leads to universal benefits that impact all segments and all parts of your business. And so when you think through digital CS as strategy, not as segment, think through it as it relates to these different motions, these different components that are needed to help your customers become successful, not just what do I need for these individual customers, but what do I actually need to accomplish these outcomes that customers need if I want to get the right content to the right person at the right time. So thinking through the benefits that this can bring for onboarding, where no matter what size segment your customers are coming from, you have customers that have onboarding needs that can be met with a digital approach, getting the right content to them, whether that's onboarding full accounts at the SMB level, or even on the enterprise side where the onboarding need is much more around new users, where they're adding new users at such a high volume. The benefits for onboarding that come from a digital CS approach are massive. Customer education. You want to be able to bring benefits to get your customers educated on how they can achieve real value and unlock real potential use cases in your product. And you don't want that to be limited by what a CSM can deliver or what a human can deliver. So digital channels bring massive benefits there. Re-engagement strategies. If you're trying to get a hold of customers leveraging digital channels, whether that's in-app, email, text, you fill in the blank depending on your segment. There are benefits to bringing back in customers who have fallen off the radar that happen through digital touches. And then, of course, driving adoption, whether that's depth or breadth of usage, which all of these lead to the successful outcomes. But the challenge is, as none of these benefits are limited to one segment, but are very segment agnostic, we want to know and understand why is it that there does not seem to be an adoption of digital strategies across all segments. So I want to talk about the elephant in the room. It's easy for us to come to a conference like this and say, yes, digital CS is a strategy, not just for a segment. But the reality that we encounter, not just the myth, is that often we find that there might be resistance internally to digital led strategies. People might not think that that's something that they need, that that's just a nice to have for their segment. Or they have a hard time maybe picturing what a potential future could look like where their CSMs are freed up to be focusing entirely on that high value human interaction augmented by a robust digital strategy. Maybe they're protective of their customers because they've seen digital done poorly in the past. And all of this leads to a siloed strategy that is limited to one segment. And so the question I want to answer as we address the elephant in the room really boils down to where do we go from here? How do you take the really powerful strategies that you are working on for your segment and bring that to the whole business with a digital lens? As we go there, there's two ways that I'm going to really focus on. Number one is the differentiation of your digital CS strategy. And number two is the way you actually accomplish change management and get buy-in. So we'll start here. We want to take a look at how do you differentiate your digital customer success strategy. The problem a lot of times when we go about trying to launch various digital customer success strategies and motions with other segments is we don't know how to differentiate for the needs of their segment. And if we don't know how to differentiate between the different types of audiences and segments that we're going to be rolling out our strategies with, and we want to talk about the benefits, we really come across as if we don't know the business that well. We really come across as not knowing what's actually needed. And if we're just going to go and speak about the benefits of digital through the lens of how it's traditionally been used, we come across very out of touch with our peers and not being able to identify how we can differentiate our strategy to make a difference for them. And so there's a danger when you fail to differentiate both in the impact with customers and with your influence internally. So when we go through, we want to talk about a couple different ways you can differentiate your digital CS strategy. And you should be thinking about now as you're building this out. Number one is the audience. Think through who are the different types of audiences that are on the receiving end of that content, right? When you think of the right person, who is it that's on the receiving end of that? So that you can make sure that your strategy accounts for what they uniquely need. So thinking through just some common user audience types. Number one, there's end users, and we tend to focus a lot on that. How are we enabling people to be able to be empowered to accomplish what they want to do in the product? They're very hyper focused on adoption and tactical value. You want to remove as much friction as possible for that type of user. And a lot of times end users are being guided with no human touch. Admins, going one layer up, your digital engagement strategy wants to be focused on proactive best practices, maybe aligning them on how do they set up even things that are as unattractive as governance for the account. How do they get that set up in a way that will actually lead to more meaningful results for what they care about? They're going to be aware of in-app communication and scaling their processes. And they're one of the ones that if you unlock their potential are going to be adding more of the end users. Moving up the chain there, you think through the actual business stakeholders where they're maybe not going to be primarily interacting with digital strategies in app. And they're much more going to be focused on value, personalized usage stats, the outcomes achieved. These are the kind of things they care about and what you'll want to accomplish for them. And then lastly, for digital, even thinking through PLG or expansion and thinking through that as potential users or potential champions at your customer who are good targets that you want to grow with your product and to grow with your org. Make sure as you are building out your strategy that you focus on how to differentiate it for these different audience types, because as you move up the segmentation chain, different ones will be a bigger priority. You might be focused primarily on end users and admins right now if you're working primarily with SMB, but then as you move up the chain, thinking through what is the value that you can do for business stakeholders and those other PLG and expansion motions. Second differentiation point, not just the type of user, but also the segment, and thinking through the different needs that these different types of customers within the various segments you service, what do they actually need? What do they care about? And when we think about SMB customers, for example, they might be smaller operations. They don't have as much specialized resourcing. And because they are not as, again, involved with having a human help in the loop for what they're trying to accomplish, your digital strategies will be much more tactical, focused on removing friction and driving towards outcomes. Your mid-market customers, they might have more specialized layers, but they're still nimble on their governance. Enterprise, they care about governance. The business stakeholders are almost never engaging directly in app. So you want to focus a lot on the end user scalability with your digital strategy, as well as how can you engage those executives? What is it that you can do? Instead of just having usage stats live in product, how do you send something that's value oriented via a digital strategy to these enterprise users? And when you have this differentiated approach by segment, you also gain influence internally, showing that you understand and have a strong knowledge of the business. And then, of course, there's just other considerations that you want to make sure you're thinking through for your differentiation point. If you serve non-tech customers, for example, there might be a need for more human touch regardless of their spend, just simply given where they are and the digital places that they're engaging. Maybe digital for them looks like text, for example. Vertical specific, if you're in a horizontal SaaS solution, maybe think through what's the approach that's nuanced by each industry you're servicing wherever you can. And then even lastly, just thinking through at the end of the day, where does customer preference come into play? One of my favorites I've heard from another org that I've worked with in the past has talked about how they ask new customers when they come on, how do they prefer to be engaged with? And so they're able to identify where they can differentiate their experience digitally based on what the customer wants to get out of that. So the key here is if you want to get buy-in and begin rolling out your digital CS strategy, you need to think through how do I differentiate this for the types of audiences, segments, and other factors that my company needs to consider. We often talk about no one size fits all, and that's true. And that's not just true of one org to another, it's even true within the various customer bases in your org and how you accomplish that. And if you haven't thought about differentiation yet, you'll want to begin thinking through that. You'll want to begin following through on how do I roll out strategies that are differentiated so that I can go to this next step and demonstrate that I have the knowledge of the business that's at the level that I can go about getting buy-in. So I'm going to talk through here. And again, when I talk about getting buy-in, there's two main components I'm going to talk about. Number one, not building in a silo. And number two is going to be how do you actually win over skeptics? So for the first one, not building in a silo, you don't need to, when you're getting buy-in, you don't need to build everything digital on your own. Partner with other internal parts of the org to accomplish those same digital outcomes. And in so doing, you win over more advocates for your digital programs because you're showing a comprehensive understanding of the business. So for example, product is a great team to partner with. Oftentimes, the product team is focused at fixing the challenges at the root issue, and they are going to be the best ones to provide the long-term solutions that will actually supercharge all of your digital efforts. I've jokingly said the best digital CS strategy is an incredible product. So work with the product team, partner with them to share feedback with them, and work to solve as many digital challenges directly in product as much as possible. Or think about how you can partner with your marketing team who is already hyper dialed in on how to leverage performance metrics. They're hyper focused on expansion and education. And so you want to work with this stakeholder internally, not to have to build all of that yourself, but work with them and make sure that you've partnered with them by, at the very least, aligning what your digital initiatives are with what they're doing, as well as finding out ways to cross promote and understand channel. So when you're planning out your strategy here, work with marketing, work with product and these other types of parts of the business so that you can gain more advocates. Customer education, if depending on the size of your org, you might have a dedicated customer education team. They are really specialized and passionate about creating content that is engaging and helps the customers actually learn how to accomplish more with your product. They're specialized in the LMS, they're specialized in actual things like instructional design and creating actual learning paths that you don't need to own on your own as you're going through creating all of that. So rather than trying to necessarily create everything for education for your customers in-house in the digital customer success strategy that you're doing, instead, partner with this team and identify whether that's identify new content for them. What's the feedback that your teams are hearing or that you're getting through your digital programs where you're identifying friction points in the product so that they can know what new courses might need developing? Or also, how do you drive discoverability for the customer education team? How do you work with them to leverage your digital CS strategy to drive adoption and discoverability of the incredible content your customer education team is likely already creating? Because I've never heard from a single customer education team on the planet that didn't spend significant time trying to think through the discoverability aspect. Lastly, one more team you want to work with to build your strategy with as a partner and gain as an advocate, your support team. When we think of digital human interaction and we're thinking through our digital CS strategy, oftentimes our support team is the front line there. They're the first point of digital human interaction in your org outside the product itself. And they're the ones who work directly with customers to resolve those acute customer challenges. They're pioneering customer facing AI, agentic AI, and frontline feedback from customers. And that's something that you want to make sure that you are working with them to understand what are the root causes that support is facing so that you can go upstream with your digital strategy and actually solve those. So this is just the first step. Make sure you're not building in a silo. Build with partners to build an army of champions and advocates for what you're doing. And that leads to how do you actually win over the skeptics in your org? What are some of the steps you can take here? Number one, prove value first. If you haven't yet proven the value and measured the progress and customer wins and improved outcomes and metrics and everything that comes with that, it's going to be hard to get other teams to be bought in. So prove real value. And if you build it, they will come. I really love that mantra with that when building internal advocates and winning over skeptics. One of my favorite wins in my career was when an enterprise leader I work with, because of what we were building in digital, came over because he reached out to me because several CSMs on his team heard about the way we were running digital strategies to help our long tail of customers. And he said, "Hey, they've been asking me, how do we get this for our customers? Because we saw it so valuable." And he wanted to ask me, like, how do we partner together to accomplish this? So prove that value. Second, show you understand their challenges. We talk all the time in the customer success space about speaking the language of our customers. The same is true internally. When you're going to your enterprise leaders, when you're going to your mid-market leaders, to your VPs, and you're talking with the different business unit leaders that are at your org, show that you understand their challenges and their customers. Because if we come trying to solve a very long tail challenge, they're not going to be bought in and care about how they can be won over to that. Third point here, make sure you're over communicating. Make sure that you are having a clear delineation with what that strategy is so that they can understand. Make sure that you've created the resources that are internal facing and distribute them widely. Make sure that you are communicating all of the ways that your team will support and give all of that infrastructure to the other teams so that they can be fully aware. And then, of course, over communicate internally. What's the off ramp to provide assurance? Because a lot of times, internal stakeholders will have the concern that if we do this and it's not working, we can't turn it back off or it's going to be messy. So, really over communicate with them and really listen, which is what gets to the final piece here. The final way to win over skeptics is ideate together, bring them into the process, ask questions, and then ask more questions about what their challenges are. Have them help with the building of the strategy for their segment and be open to their feedback and lead with humility. And that last one is a lot harder said than done because you're passionate about digital. You are maybe the expert at your company on digital strategies. And so you'll go to another segment leader with this strategy that you have that you want to implement. And it's difficult to sometimes make sure that their feedback is well received by you. So go with a position of humility. And when they share feedback, really be open to listening to their feedback so that you can improve and bring them into the ideation process. And really, the last piece when I think about how to win over skeptics and gain those advocates as an org is acknowledge the limits of what you can actually accomplish through digital channels. Digital is not going to be the panacea that solves everything, and it will be done hand in hand with the ongoing human interactions that are driven in these other segments and within the whole org. I love this photo here that I have of the record player. Very much aging myself very specifically with the Killers album there. But more importantly, because as much as I love the digital music services that I have, I listen to Spotify as much as anybody else. I love having a place for just sitting and listening to the experience that comes with a vinyl record sometimes. Despite all the benefits that come from a big, massive digital library that I'll never be able to listen to everything that I want to on and the convenience of having it on my phone. Acknowledging that there are limits to what we can accomplish with digital helps us not come across like we're losing our credibility by promising the moon when we can only deliver something else. So make sure when you're talking to other stakeholders and winning over skeptics, acknowledge where you see digital augmenting what they do, where it comes to its limits, so that they'll take you seriously as a business partner and you can be clear on what you're asking them to help make sure that you're driving together towards outcomes. So hopefully you've heard the big theme as we go through all this, that if you're trying to roll out digital for all, you do this together, not on your own. And really, I know we blew through some of that content there, but with the last, I think, about 5 or 7 minutes, Pascal, I wanted to turn over for some of the questions we've got here.
Yeah, encourage everybody to put any questions that they have into the Q&A section. But as I was listening through this, a few questions popped up in my head in terms of, okay, so uh, proving value first obviously makes sense. But I think one of the challenges that I was thinking through is like, how do you prove value first if a lot of that value that you need is dependent on these other partners, right? So it's kind of like a bit of a chicken and egg question. So I guess what's in your control to prove value first before going to your partners?
Absolutely. So typically, if you're in on a call like this and you're in digital, you have a segment that you're doing. So proving the value in very clear, no uncertain terms, what your strategies have solved challenge-wise for your segment. And I think starting with that, because sometimes we can get, if I'm being honest, a little squishy when we're talking about what we've solved. If we say that, hey, we've rolled out digital strategies and they've increased adoption in our customer base, that sounds nice on the surface, but so many other teams are going to claim that they had an influence on adoption. So if you're able to drive and prove, hey, we ran campaigns X with Y customer cohort, and based on what we did, we actually saw an increase in the number of people building in our platform because that's what we were targeting, was very specifically doing that because we know for all the other teams internally, builders drive overall adoption, and we have a challenge of how do I create more builders at my customer. We solved this very specific challenge here. showing the value. And that's what I mean is being able to prove the value even in your segment. Because if we're squishy about what we're actually doing for our segment, it's going to be hard for somebody to want to trust us with their customers because for better or worse, they're protective. And I think for the better because they're protective of their customer base and they want to make sure there's real value. Does that help answer,
Totally.
Pascal?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Another question came in. Does the build together strategy work mostly for sweat equity, and or have you found this works for help with sharing budget cross-functionally?
Great question on sharing budget cross-functionally. Haven't had the need to do that, but that's an excellent way to get that buy-in if you're trying to do that. And that's an excellent point about working it from that particular angle. I would say it's the sweat equity, but also the ideation piece. Like you really are getting more out of what you learn from the other teams sometimes because just like you might be the actual expert at what digital engagement looks like at your org, they truly are the experts at their segment and knowing what their customers need. So bridging that gap will only best happen together, not on either of you applying your separate expertise on its own. And I think that that's the biggest benefit. Plus, of course, the sweat equity. And I do think if you need to, then yes, please do use that as a cost sharing budget.
Yeah, gotta do what you gotta do. Another question came in. What's one initiative in your digital strategy that's had the biggest measurable impact so far, and why do you think it worked?
Yeah, I would say so going to the customer education, you heard me talk about that as kind of one component. We saw a very clear indicator of builders to overall adoption. And one of the biggest things we saw, because we getting aside all the things of how we classify people as builders and whatnot, we saw there's a very clear correlation between one of our particular customer education courses and builders and then therefore titles that were associated to be builders. So I've driven with one of my prior orgs ultimately a digital engagement strategy that was yes, we would always kind of push the course out to try to encourage adoption of it because we never know, right, on with customers. But when we saw certain job titles get flagged, we would really particularly flag that for them and say, for your role in particular, people have really benefited from doing this. Here's what you get in your role. And so we targeted it with those job title components that really let it show that we knew them. And it brought that
Mm,
layer of personalization to it. And so that's just one example I would say that we found. And it did lead to, of course, the biggest kind of most leading indicator was uptick in the overall academy course completions, right? That's kind of the first. But then we need to test the hypothesis. Did that lead to a higher influx of builders among those who we sent it to? And that's why we had to actually kind of test it with one smaller subset before sending it to everybody. Because again, if we did it for everybody, it's a little harder to prove that this was our thing we did that led to it, right?
mm,
So we did it with a subsegment and we saw a statistically meaningful increase in the number of builders for that cohort of customers over the next, like, it was 60-ish days because we know that it would take time to take the course, begin building before then they'd get flagged as a builder versus similar starting time customers and users who did not get that campaign. And so we then institutionalized that.
got it. So basically, like sort of first identifying like the most important cohort of people, and then hyper personalizing your outreach to that specific individual group about the value that they're going to get.
Exactly.
Got it. No, that makes a ton of sense. Um, I think we are just about at time, actually. So with that, um, I will wrap it up. This session has been recorded and will be available early next week in our resource hub. All summit attendees will be notified when the resource hub is available. And just wanted to say a big thank you to Dan for coming and presenting, and big thank you to all of you for attending. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you.
Have a good one.